Okay, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for your time and joining us for this webinar, 6 Principles for Teaching Hybrid Classes Effectively. This one, the one that we're covering today, is specially designed for teachers for grade 6 to 12. My name is Sarah Shuja, and I'm a marketing manager based in Dubai. So not far from you all. Yes, Ruba, I am also in Dubai. Before we go any further, just a quick sound check. If you can hear my voice, there's a hand icon at the bottom of your screen. If you can just click on the hand icon, and I know you can hear my voice. Excellent, lots of hands going up. So just a brief overview of the session today. We will be talking about the learnings we have gained from the past year in the COVID situation, and we'll talk about the 6 principles for teaching hybrid classes effectively, followed by the option to get into a breakout room with the curriculum specialist. I'll get into the details for that later, because following the PD session, you have the option to get into a breakout room for either math or science, and we will be sharing more details with you shortly for that. We have got moderators for you today, so we are there in the background to help you if you have any questions or if you face any trouble. That's myself, Sarish, and my colleague Hamad. We are here to help you. If you have any questions, just pop them for us in the Q&A box. We've got DJ, who's joined us all the way from New York, 7 a.m. his time and afternoon for us. Thank you, DJ, for joining us.
You are very welcome. I'm so glad to be here.
Great. Just a bit about DJ. He's the National Director for Professional Learning at McGraw Hill, and he has an experience of 25 years in science, math, education as a Dean of Student Principal. I won't get into a lot of details, but basically he's done a lot of workshops and travels internationally. I've met him a few times, and he's come over to the Middle East. Some of you might even have met him for previous sessions, because I know, DJ, when we were going to do this workshop, a lot of people from Kuwait and Qatar were like, is DJ going to give the workshop? So our audience is pretty familiar with you. Thank you for being here.
Oh, I very much appreciate it. I'm just sad that we can't be there in person.
Yes, that is true. So the breakout rooms that I was covering with you before, there are 2 breakout rooms. As you can see, Jason will be covering the one for Inspire Science 6 to 12, and Shelly will be covering the one for Reveal Math 6 to 12. After this session, after DJ's session, you have an option to get into the breakout rooms, and you can get the details in this document that I've just dropped in the chat box. You don't have to get into the breakout rooms now. This is after DJ's session. And I will share the links to the individual breakout rooms as well, so you have them when you need them. Just quickly, housekeeping before I pass on. Please make sure you close down any high networking app, such as Netflix, YouTube, gaming platform, because this is going to affect the bandwidth of your webinar. Also, one more thing, if you're facing any connectivity issues, just make sure you're connected to the audio. Otherwise, you can always use the call-in function from your phone. We will be sharing the recording of this webinar as well. So once you complete the session, you will be by next week, you should have the recording of this webinar. And we're also going to share the certificates. If you have any Q&A for DJ or any of us, just put this in the chat box, and we will let you know. Just engage with us. We want to make this as interactive as possible. If you want other participants to view your comments, you can select the drop-down button, all panelists and attendees, and then you will be able to see the comments from other. And no, there is no ELA session breakout room for today. There are only 2 sessions. There is math and science. Just reading the comments from the chat. I hope I've not missed out anything. Yes, yesterday's session was recorded. And yeah, just engage with DJ in the chat box, join the discussion, share your thoughts. And we're here in the background to help you out, and I hope you have a great time. I will stop sharing now, DJ.
Great, and I will start sharing. This session is going to be general. The breakouts will be particular to math or science. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. And there we go. Sharish, can you see my screen?
Yes, I can see your screen.
Great, excellent. Good morning. Thank you for joining. I have been to many of the countries that you're in, but not all of them. I still have some of my list to do. And I do wish that I was able to be there in person. In fact, when all of this hit last February, March, we actually had a team over in the Middle East doing sessions like this. And we had 7 sessions planned, I think, Sharish, and we ended up having to stop after the 3rd one and send the presenters home. So this year we're doing it virtually, just like you guys have been doing so many things virtually on your own. Now I'm going to start my timer so I make sure that I stay on time. Today what we're going to look at is 6 principles to maximize hybrid learning. And one of the things that I truly hope is that during this last almost year now, and who would have believed it was a year, we have actually learned some very important principles, and we've started using tools that we hadn't used before. In fact, one of the tools that we found out is just the digital part that goes along with our programs at McGraw Hill are very rich, and it's amazing how much is in there. But what happened was that a lot of people, because of how we've learned to teach, never used the digital material. Well, our usage of the digital materials for math and science and the other programs has gone up over 700% in the last year because all of us have had to adapt. So I want to start out with just an image for you that kind of, replicates what we've gone through. So when we think about going back to school or doing school, our students that started school even this year, and we as teachers, encountered a very different situation. So instead of their normal backpack and all of those kinds of things, they had to equip themselves with masks and those kinds of things. So, and the other thing that we found is all of us have experienced unprecedented times, and we're still in the middle of that. When all of this first started, I would say to my children, there are certain events in my life that you will never forget where you were or what you were doing. I remember I was actually teaching when the space shuttle blew up a number of years ago, and I will never forget the students I was in the room with at that moment. And all of us have those moments. For my children, I told them, this is one of those moments that you will never forget. Little did we think that it would expand into almost a year now of working with this. So in those unprecedented times, we have learned a number of things. Now, for today's session, what I'd like to do as we start thinking about these 6 principles is I want to start out with just a few definitions. And the reason I want to look at these is because these words have become very familiar to all of us, okay? And hang on, I'm going to move my bar. There we go, okay? So I can see the screen better. So these terms, I want to make sure we're working off the same definitions because we're going to use these throughout. The first one is synchronous learning. Synchronous learning is any time that you are live with your class. Now, that synchronous time could be in person if you're doing hybrid. It could be on a Zoom meeting, or you notice the ones I listed up here: WebEx, Teams, Zoom, Google Hangout. There are other ones that I've used. In fact, one day, a couple of weeks ago, I was on 5 different platforms streaming with people. But this synchronous learning simply means we're in person. It could be small group, it could be whole group, okay? It could be all of your class. The second one is asynchronous learning. And again, all of you are familiar with this term. The only thing I want to do is today I want to use it a little bit differently. And that is learning happening without the teacher or instructor being present. And this could be both independently, an individual on their own. It could be a collaborative group of students working together on something where you are not present. But it could be discussion, it could be modeling, it could be practice, it could be homework, it could be exploration, it could be watching a video, it could be a lot of different things. But the way I want to use it differently today is that asynchronous, we're going to refer to things that are done without you that are going to tie back to what you do synchronously in the class. Independent learning, for the purpose of what we're doing today, is work that is done individually, specifically supporting an individual student. So it's a type of asynchronous learning, but independent learning isn't going to come back in the classroom. You're not going to discuss it when you get back together in the class. It's something the student is doing to meet their own individual need. And then remote or distance learning is learning that is all virtual, it's at home, or there's no in-person time. And then hybrid learning, which many of you are experiencing, is some learning that's virtual and some that is home. The principles that we're going to look at today will apply actually whether you're remote totally, whether you're hybrid, or many of these principles will even apply when we come back in the classroom. So let's jump right into these 6 considerations for remote and hybrid learning in the classroom. And I want to tell you, I hope that we don't forget some of these lessons. Some of these can be useful to us regardless of whether we're in this hybrid situation, remote situation, or when we come back into the classroom. So let's take a look. Number 1, use diagnostic assessment wisely. And let me tell you why I'm bringing this up. There has been a lot of discussion coming back to this school year, during this school year, and there will be next year coming back into our classrooms once we are all back in person, about how much learning loss has taken place. And learning loss is a true thing. I mean, many students, did not get into the depth. Their attendance is not the same. Their focus on math, science, ELA, social science is not the same. And so there is a variety of learning loss. But diagnostic assessment should have 3 specific uses. Number 1, if I do a diagnostic assessment at the beginning of the year, or if I do it at the beginning of a topic, I'm getting ready to go in and explore, that diagnostic can help me understand what precursor concepts my individual student is missing. If I understand that, then there are tools that I can use to help bring them back onto the level where they can access the on-grade level material. So that helps me identify it. I could also do a diagnostic to help me understand how students are progressing. Now, the uses of diagnostic then are to understand what a student is missing. So maybe I touch on some precursor concepts before class. Number 2, maybe I assign out some resources to help groups of students that are missing precursor concepts. Or maybe I understand what independent tools I need to use individually for a student. What I don't want to use diagnostic assessment for is to spend all my time teaching on missing concepts. So use it, but use it wisely. You do need to use it to understand where students are, but what you don't want to do is focus all of your time on the missing concepts that you find from a diagnostic assessment. So remember, if all of my class is missing a precursor concept, I want to touch on that class, or they can't move forward in the content we're working on. Number 2, it might identify some resources or some supplements that I want to send out to a student before we enter the material. Or thirdly, it may help me identify individual students that need intervention or that I want to use independent products with. And remember, independent, they're working on their own. They're not going to bring it back in the classroom. Number 2, and this is probably the most important one I'm going to mention today out of all 6, you need to make sure that you're adjusting the pacing expectations. If I'm a mathematics teacher in a hybrid or remote situation, there is no way that I can cover exactly the same material that I cover in the classroom. And in fact, probably we needed to be doing this before we started, but in looking what I'm teaching my students, I need to make sure that I'm adjusting what I'm expecting to cover in the classroom. And that's true for a couple of reasons. Number 1 is true because none of us, and I've had to do it and so have you probably, can be on a Zoom meeting all day, every day, and expect our attention to understand the same kinds of things we're doing in the classroom. And I want you to think about, if we go back and think about our classrooms, how we taught before COVID, we didn't try to tie up every moment with us lecturing in front of the classroom, or hopefully we didn't. Because a student sitting through that all day would not be able to take in all of the information that we're sharing. They need time for discussion. They need time to interact with the ideas with other students. They need time to work on it and try it and then come back and discuss it as a classroom. We need the same things that we're doing in a hybrid situation where we're adjusting the pacing. So by adjusting the pacing, I mean two things. How much material I'm expecting to cover in a classroom, in a week, and in a year, and then altering the pace at which I do that. Now, I'll give you a couple examples. This is an example out of our science material. And so what you're going to see on the left-hand side of the screen, it actually says full track. That's 45 minutes per day, every day, all year. And if I was going to do that in science, our program works on a 5E lesson plan model: engage, explore, explain, elaborate, and evaluate. I would have those lessons broken down, and I would know what I was going to cover every day within that 5E lesson plan. In a hybrid situation, I still am covering the same essential question. I'm looking at the same idea, but I'm going to look and determine how much of that I would do. So we have a couple of different flex tracks could be done based on the amount of time I have. Now, one of the things I want to mention, both for my science and math teachers here that are present, for my science teachers, adjusting that pacing expectation should not mean that when I adjust the topic, I cut out all of the hands-on experiences or the virtual investigations and I only deliver content. And the reason I say that, because the skills students are learning in math, science, social studies, and ELA. In science, the science practices, creating arguments from evidence, using inquiry, using observation, those things are of primary importance along with the content. So in adjusting pacing, I can adjust it 2 or 3 different ways. One way I can adjust pacing is by removing certain topics, okay? I used to feel bad as a math and science teacher when I didn't finish everything during the year. I didn't finish the whole book. Well, you know what? It's not necessarily important you have to look at the whole book. So you might sit down with your colleagues and look and say, you know what, in biology, we don't need to cover this. In math, we can remove this topic. So that's one way to do it. The second way to adjust pacing is to adjust the depth in which we go into the topic. If I'm thinking about biology, do I need to cover in detail every step of the Krebs cycle? Or would it be better in this society we're in right now to cover an overview of what happens in cellular energy? So those are ideas that we need to think about. So I need to make sure I'm adjusting my pacing expectations. Number 3 goes along with these first 2. The reason I said using diagnostic assessment wisely, regardless of the subject area that you teach, you need to make sure that you are focusing on the grade level work. So if I gave a diagnostic assessment and then I looked at it and I had some students that were missing grade level content from last year, I cannot spend all of my time teaching prior year content. I have to make sure that I am focused on this year's content. Now, as a math teacher, it's a little bit different. If I teach language arts, if I teach science, if I teach social science, I'm able to pull in the skills from last year into the work that we're doing this year. So if you think about writing, if you think about grammar, I can still pull that in there to the current grade level reading. Math is a little bit different because you do have to deal with the precursors, but you can do that through independent engagement, or you can do that in assignments that are sent out to groups of students that are many that are built into the current resources you have. Now, what I have on the screen, and this will be in the handout, this is the website, The Inclusive Classroom. And this is a specific article on 12 strategies to engage students who work below grade level in the current grade level work. So it's an article that's linked out, and when you link into that, and I'm going to let it open up real quick. And Sharice, can you see my screen?
Yes, I can see your screen.
Great, thank you. As I scroll down through here, what you're going to see is specific different strategies that can be used for students who are struggling with the prior grade level content. Now, when you look at these, not all 12 will apply necessarily to your discipline, but there are pieces that you could pull out to use to support your students. And these are free resources. You can take a look at that when you have time. Now, the other part that goes directly along with the grade level work is focusing on the most important work. And this means the most important work for your grade level, for your subject. Now, how do we know what the most important work is? And in general, I would give you this guideline. the work that you're looking at, let's say math or science, is it going to be used in the next grade level? Now, science is a little bit different because we're teaching biology, chemistry, physics, and there are connections that are happening more along the skill set. But in math and ELA, if you think about it, in math especially, there are certain topics that you're doing this year that they're going to use directly in the math next year. In the US, we've actually called these the priority standards. So if you looked at your standard set, there are certain standards that are so important because of how they're going to be used later on. We need to make sure that's what we're focusing on. Now, we've actually created a number of tools at McGraw-Hill to support you with this. One of the things that we did is actually went into each of our math programs, we went into our science programs, and we went into our language art programs, and we looked at it and said, if you're looking at a specific lesson, what is the prerequisite skill and what are the priority standards? So in this, you're going to see one of the things that we did is there's a prerequisite skill they need in order to be successful with this idea. If I did my unit diagnostic or my module diagnostic, I would know if students were struggling with this work and then could either set that out independently, work with them as a group on it, or send it out. The other one you're going to notice, like compute with scientific notation here, this is an optional topic. And the reason it's optional, because where it's going to be used in the future. So we pulled that out. Now, I have a link in the handout on the priority instructional content. And if I click this link open, and I'm going to let that open up as we talk just for a minute, there was a group called Achieve the Core that actually went through all of the ELA standards and all of the math standards. And if you actually Googled Achieve the Core, you can find this website. They did this for K through all the way through high school. And you can pull down what the priority standards are at the grade level based on that work and then what's covered in the future. So this focus on priority content is extremely important for students to work through it. Now, principle number 5 then, use synchronous time strategically. So let's stop just for a second and think about the 4 that we've talked about. Number 1, use diagnostic assessment wisely. So what does that mean? Understand using the diagnostic assessments either for the whole year or for a specific module. Understanding what students are, precursor concept students are missing, and then using support material to help them understand those missing ideas. If it's a direct prerequisite and most of the class is missing it, I may need to spend some time reviewing it, but basically I should use asynchronous time to do that. Number 2, adjusting my pacing expectations. In adjusting my pacing expectations, I need to remember that I need to focus on grade level content, which was number 3, and that I need to focus on the most important content, the priority ideas that are most important for them to take forward in their learning. So number 5, let's think about using synchronous time strategically. So whether that is in person, whether you're in person, or whether you're remote, okay? You want to make sure that the use of the time you have with students is done in the best way possible. A couple of things I want to mention with this. Number 1, thinking about what the most important time is to do. Now, we've done a couple of tools at McGraw-Hill for our programs to try to help with this. So I'm going to pull this one up. Thinking about the 5E lesson plan for science. And I'm going to use a couple different examples here, okay? In that 5E lesson plan, we typically do a prior knowledge assessment like we've been talking about, and then we engage the students in the phenomenon. We go into exploring that phenomenon in some type of hands-on investigation, and then students and the teacher together start to develop explanations around the exploration and around the phenomenon. They then go on to take that idea and elaborate it through further investigation, through looking at how that concept relates to other things in the world, and then we evaluate. Now, if you think about this cycle of lesson plan, in math, we would do it with some type of launch activity. We would go into an exploration, exploring and developing the math content. We would then do an application and then go on to assessment. So all of these open with either an engage or a launch. And we all know that. We do something to engage the students in the idea. A lot of times that engagement piece can be done asynchronously. Is that where I want to spend my time? Well, maybe it is for a specific topic, but you want to think about what you're doing. So one of the things that we did, this is in the explore and the explains phase, is one of the things we use in middle school and high school science is a claim evidence reasoning piece. And looking at that, how would I use it if I were face-to-face? How would I do it synchronously? How would I do it asynchronously? Now, let me give you one really good example for this. Right below it says, have students watch a teacher demonstration to extend their knowledge of a concept. So you're going to actually do a demo. Now, you know what? You could do this demo, whether you're fully remote, whether you're hybrid, or whether you're in person. But I want you to think in the hybrid situation or in the remote situation. I could bring my Zoom meeting up. I could take the time in my Zoom meeting to actually do the demonstration. But is that the best use of my synchronous time? Because you know what? The students can watch that demonstration in a video that you create, and then you could spend the synchronous time actually discussing that demonstration and how it relates to the topic at hand. Any math teachers, anything that's modeling can be done better in an asynchronous situation where you're using something like Screencastify or Loom to record that, have them watch it, and spend the time more in discussion or exploration around that topic when you're in the synchronous classroom. So thinking about that, we've done the same thing for math, looking at what activities work best asynchronously and synchronously. Now, one of the things that you guys might have, maybe you're using Desmos, we have built into our programs a piece called Web Sketch, where the students are interacting with the math around that idea. They should be interacting with the math with that web sketch independently on their own, asynchronously, and then we discuss that in the classroom, what it means. So think about what is the best use of the time I have directly with my students. By the way, lecture typically is not the best thing to use your synchronous time on. You can record that in 10-minute chunks, have the students listen to that, and then come back for the discussion around it to see their understanding with those ideas. So think about using that synchronous time strategically. The next one, the work you're doing in your classroom, design it for access and for equity. And what we mean by designing it for access and equity is a couple of things. When you're thinking about your students, number one, you have to think about the tasks that I'm doing. Are they age appropriate for the student to do on their own? So depending if you're teaching 6th grade or if you're teaching 11th or 12th grade, what is age appropriate is different for those students. For them to do more independent work at the higher levels, and you think about this K-12, that range extends all the way across the board. And it goes into all the planning you're doing about priority content. It goes into the planning you're doing about what's best done synchronously and asynchronously. But you really need to think about the age appropriateness of what I'm asking the students to accomplish. And then secondly, and this is so important, you really need to attend to clarity in the directions and thinking about what might lend confusion to people and the barriers that they're going to do about work they're doing remotely or in the remote section of their hybrid learning. Now, I have to tell you, it's a great idea to have someone else read your instructions before you send them out to the student. So if you have a spouse that can look at them, if you have a child at home that could look at them, have them do that. And the reason I say that, if you go back to class, now when I was teaching science, you know, before we did a hands-on investigation or a lab activity, you would actually go through all the instructions for them in detail. And then as soon as you finished doing the instructions, it never failed that some student would say, what are we supposed to do? And you're thinking, I just went through the instructions. Just make sure, because in your mind, you already know what you want them to do. Just make sure that you've clarified for them what's necessary. So make sure that all of the students can access the work and it's equitable for them. And this is an especially difficult time for our special education students, our students on learning plans and those kinds of things. So even then, you have to make sure there's some scaffold you're building in to support them. Just one example right here. If I was going to have the students do a virtual investigation in science, or if I was going to have to do a web sketch in math, or if I was going to have them use a new tool in English language arts, you might want to record a short instructional video on that tool to show how the tool is used before they actually go into it. Because part of that, you don't want them to get confused and quit. You don't want them to become frustrated. And you really want them spending their time not figuring out the tool, but figuring out the math, the science, the language arts, or the social science behind the tool. The most important thing in these 6, so let's stop and review again just really quickly. 1, use diagnostic assessment wisely. Make sure that you adjust your pacing. Make sure you're focusing on grade level content. Make sure you're focusing on the priority content. Use your synchronous time wisely. It is so precious. And then the last one that we just looked at, design it for equity and access. The most important thing when you tie all these together is that we are teaching and that our students are learning that primary content when they go into it. Now, I want to touch on one other topic as we wrap up in these next few minutes. That balance of synchronous, asynchronous, and independent work, and how you are using that with your students. So here's what I mean by this. If you think about the triangle of learning, this triangle does not matter if you're in a remote classroom, if you're in a hybrid classroom, or if you're face-to-face. And this is what I mean about taking those learnings with us in the future, regardless of if we're all back in the classroom or not. Students are always involved in synchronous, asynchronous work. And one of the learnings I think we ought to take forward with us is that every student ought to be involved in some type of independent work. I'll explain what I mean by these. Synchronous, the best thing to do when we're together, that whole group instruction, small group instruction. I want to work to activate their prior knowledge. I want to make sure I'm reteaching things that they didn't grasp when they were working in their asynchronous work or in discussions that we've had. That's why if we're going to do these things, the best use of this time is not necessarily us lecturing to the students. It's not necessarily that, because you know what, we can do that. Like we've all heard about the flipped classroom model. We can do that in a flipped classroom. We can do that in video format. Don't use my live time to do that. Let's use the live time to dig into their understanding of what's been instructed, and then being able to reteach based on quick assessments that I've done or knowledge checks that I've done. But those are the types of things that happen really well in synchronous work. In asynchronous work, this is the material that's going to apply directly to what I'm doing live with my students. That could be that before a classroom lesson, I've recorded something I want them to watch ahead of time. It could be that before class piece, like that explore activity of the virtual lab, I'm asking them to get into and work through before we actually get into the lesson and talk about it. It can be application after the class lesson. So we needed to understand a topic before we actually got into the material. Let me now give you that highlight. We're going to discuss it some. Now go apply it, whether it's an application or performance task in science or math, whether it's a lab activity I do after I understand the basics of science. Practice and modeling can happen very well. So if one of the things I'm doing in science, math, ELA is I'm talking about developing arguments from evidence, I can actually do some modeling about that, but I don't necessarily need to do it live. I could do the modeling and then have the students come in, put them in breakout room and have them develop an argument based off certain evidence that I give them, and how would they put that together. But thinking about what those things they can do that are going to apply directly back to what we're doing in the class. This third category is what I want to touch on, and this is independent work. And here's what I mean by independent. It's something that's personal for the student. Now that could be personal in a few ways. Number one, it could be filling gaps from prior year's knowledge. We all know in math class, we have students who walk in, they could be in Algebra 2 and they don't know how to add fractions. And if you don't know how to add a fraction, you're going to be in trouble when you get into functions and have to deal with that. So something to help fill the gaps, something for ongoing support that's helping a student on grade level really work through that. And then also for intervention and acceleration, that acceleration allowing students to go forward. This is the category I really want you to think about that we haven't done well in the past. This is often done best by a digital program, but this material you're not going to bring back into your synchronous discussion. It's specifically intended to help the individual student. Now on the screen right now, you're seeing the names of 4 different programs we have at McGraw-Hill that are meant specifically for this independent type work. Alex and Redbird are for math. SmartBook, we actually have built into our science programs. RISE is for ELA and for mathematics, and Redbird also has an ELA component. But these are computerized programs that we evaluate what a student knows and doesn't know, and then actually allow that student to work independently. Now you can still see the data on it, but you don't have to guide the student in it. They can work their way through in it. They can fill holes, they can support what they're doing right now, or they can actually accelerate their learning. So these have been the 6 principles for remote and hybrid learning. If you're interested as a school in looking in more depth around professional development for remote and hybrid learning, we have a partnership with a company called Link that has a beautiful professional development platform called LinkSpring that focuses on the topics you see on the screen right now: remote learning, hybrid learning, remote learning pedagogy, project-based learning, teacher mindset, assessment, blended classroom learning. These are topics, and if you're interested in that, please reach out to one of our McGraw-Hill colleagues. Now, following this session up, there's one more session tomorrow. This one is for specifically on intervention. It will be quite different from the K-5 session we did yesterday and what we did today around the 6 principles. Really recommend you join that. It can deal with that independent part we just talked about. And then right after this session, there are 2 breakout rooms. You are going to choose either math or science. Sharish gave you the document. We're going to bring the links up and also put those in the chat. You're going to click the link. It will tell you you have to leave this room. You're going to leave this room and join the new session. And then there's a second one. So there are actually 2 breakouts today. There's one immediately following, either math or science. Math with Jason Marshall, science with Shelley McClanahan, 2 of our national specialists that are going to walk you through that. You're simply going to click the link, leave the session, and then immediately following, you can actually join the other session. So if you'd like to attend both, you just go back. If you attend the science one, click the math link for the second session and go on. So Sharish, with that one, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thank you, DJ. Thank you. You've covered some great points. Thank you for sharing. Even if I heard this, a lot of it, I think it was quite different to what we heard yesterday. So thank you so much.
You are
As we
very
mentioned,
welcome.
thank you. We are dropping the links to the session. As he said, if you want to attend the math one first, you can attend the math one, and then you can jump onto the science one. So you can attend both of them actually, one after the other. You can start joining them now. You're very welcome.
Great. Thanks all of you for attending today. We would love to hear your feedback on the survey.
Did you get a question in the Q&A? Well, I wonder if you'll be able to pick it up.
Yeah, let me check real quick. Modeling and asynchronous learning. Let's say I'm going to model in math. If I was going to model deconstructing a polynomial, I could actually do that in a video and model that for my students rather than spending the class time modeling that. So that's a, yes, this is the end of the general session. So that's an example of what modeling, showing the students how to do something. You don't necessarily need to do that in your synchronous time. It's far better to do that in the asynchronous time, have them watch it, and then use the live time around discussing that. I'm in a situation where we're delivering hybrid learning, so synchronous and asynchronous takes place simultaneously. Oh, that was early in the session. Those strategies actually are going to be looked at somewhat about how you could use the materials to do that. The breakdown of asynchronous, synchronous, and independent doesn't necessarily change even if you're in that hybrid learning model. You still have to think about what the students are going to do on their own and then what the students are going to do together. Okay. So our colleagues, Jason and Shelley, are waiting in the other rooms for you. We see about half of you have joined. If you're an English teacher, you have a couple of choices. You could either join one of the math or science sessions if you feel likely, or just leave after the general session. There isn't a specific breakout for English teachers.
I'll go ahead and join the breakout session now, DJ.
Great, thanks.
Thank you so much.
Okay, I'll talk to you soon.
Take care.
Yes, my Twitter account, somebody asked for, is @DJWest78.